Why was 10 minutes decided as the amount of time necessary for a steady and diminishing flow for each block? How is it guaranteed that a solution will be found within exactly this amount of time? That's a great question, Dimitris. Let's break that into two parts. First part is, why was 10 minutes decided as the amount of time necessary for each block? It was really a matter of balancing two competing interests. When you have a heartbeat in a blockchain consensus algorithm, as you do in Bitcoin, you've got to account for the fact that miners may be operating anywhere on the planet and may even discover blocks simultaneously in different parts of the world, which then are transmitted to the network at different speeds and may arrive at different times for different nodes. Let's think of an example. Let's say you have a miner in Australia and you have a miner in Canada, and they both simultaneously and by accident discover a new block, and then their blocks start propagating across the Bitcoin network and across the world. Now, as you can imagine, they're going to eventually be transmitted to the entire network. However, for some part of the Bitcoin network, the nodes will hear the block coming from, let's say, Canada first, whereas for another part of the Bitcoin network, the nodes will hear the blocks coming from Australia first. And so in that case, some of the nodes will assume that the Australian block was found first, some of the nodes will assume the Canada block was found first. What that causes is a temporary and a normal fork. That type of fork happens on average about once a week. It's a one-block divergence in the network, and it's fixed with the very next block because the chance of two nodes simultaneously again finding a block is unlikely. So in the next block, one miner is going to find a new solution to a block and transmit it. And if they built on top of the Canadian block, that's the one that's part of the chain. If they built on top of the Australian block, because that's the one they heard first, that's the one that's part of the chain. The other block that wasn't made part of the longer chain will simply get recycled with all of its transactions, and all of those transactions will be re-included in subsequent blocks. This type of one-block fork happens, as I said, on average once a week. Now, imagine if you shortened the target time for a block. You're producing blocks every 5 minutes, or every 1 minute, or even every 30 seconds. And some blockchains do that. Ethereum is a good example. Ethereum has 15 to 30 second blocks and uses proof of work similarly. But in the case of Ethereum, the consensus algorithm actually anticipates that you're going to have these so-called orphaned blocks occurring much, much more often. And it used a different consensus algorithm to anticipate that. The original Bitcoin consensus algorithm was fine-tuned to reduce the number of these orphan blocks that will occur naturally so as to avoid retransmissions and reconvergence of the network. And so it only happens once a week. If you made it every 5 minutes, it might happen 4 or 5 times a week. And if you made it every 1 minute, it may happen several times a day. So this was a careful tuning. It was assumed at the time that 10 minutes would be perfectly adequate for clearing and settlement of transactions on Bitcoin. And for most use cases, in fact, it is. And that's really the trade-off. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question was, how is it guaranteed that a solution will be found within exactly this amount of time? And that has to do with what is known as difficulty retargeting. So every 2 weeks, or every 2016 blocks more accurately, the difficulty of the Bitcoin consensus algorithm is adjusted so as to converge onto 10 minutes, meaning 10 minutes is the fixed heartbeat time of the Bitcoin network, and what is variable is the difficulty of hashing. If more miners are hashing, then they'll find blocks a bit more often than every 10 minutes on average, and then the difficulty will be increased in the next 2-week period in order to adjust for that. So what changes is the difficulty, and what remains fixed is the timing. The heartbeat is always targeted to 10 minutes on average across many blocks, and what changes is the difficulty so that the heartbeat retargets to 10 minutes. And the 10-minute time period is hard-coded into the software. That is the one static heartbeat of Bitcoin. Supicha asks, when more people become miners as they can earn Bitcoin, is there any effect to the Bitcoin ecosystem? If the miners are more than the transactions needed to be verified, will this cause competition between the miners? In fact, that's already the case. Miners do not split transactions between them. Miners all mine pretty much the same transactions because all of the transactions that are available in the system and need to be mined are shared with everyone. So everyone has a copy of what's called the mempool, where they have the unconfirmed transactions. Think of it as a giant reservoir where unconfirmed transactions are waiting, and every miner has their own copy of this reservoir, and they use it to construct their candidate blocks that they're going to run the proof of work algorithm on. And they try to cram as many of those transactions as they can fit into their candidate block. The competition isn't between miners as to what transactions they're going to mine. The competition between miners is to how much hashing power they can put into their proof of work so they can find a solution first. However, there is also competition in the transaction reservoir, or mempool if you like, which is there's competition between transaction senders. If you send a transaction and you want it mined faster, you put a higher fee. And you're competing against everybody else who's trying to get space in the limited space of the block for their transaction, and you're competing through the pricing mechanism of fees. So all the users are competing for space in the block, and all miners are competing for speed in terms of how fast they solve the block so they can be first, because the Bitcoin mining algorithm is a winner takes all. So the first miner to win is the only one who gets rewarded. The next question comes from Vincent and is about simplified payment verification proofs in sidechains. Vincent asks, I would like to understand better how they work. Who are the verifiers, and what is the special output mentioned in slide 21? Are the verifiers the miners? Are SPV proofs only used in the two-way peg model? On page 21, just for reference, the text reads, the technical basis of sidechains is a two-way peg whereby Bitcoin can be transferred between any chain, parent and sidechains, at a deterministic or fixed rate. That's an exchange rate. In addition, SPV proofs play a vital role in sidechains. SPV proofs allow verifiers to check that some amount of work has been committed to the existence of a special output and to determine history by trusting that the longest blockchain is the correct longest blockchain. So, to answer Vincent's question, what are the SPV proofs and how are they used in this particular scenario? What an SPV proof is, effectively, is demonstrating that a transaction output that is unspent was created in a specific block in the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, by relating it to the Merkle root of transactions. So a block has within it a Merkle root for transactions, and that Merkle root has been committed in the block and is part of the block hash and therefore is immutable. And that Merkle root depends on all of the transactions that are in the Merkle tree. So you can prove that a transaction is inside a specific block with a very simple and short proof where you relate it to the Merkle root by showing a Merkle path. A Merkle path is a series of hashes that show the other side of the tree so that you can reconstruct all the way up to the Merkle root. So you say, well, here's the transaction ID, here's the hash it was hashed with to produce its parent, here's the hash that parent was hashed with to produce its parent, here's the hash that parent was hashed with to produce its parent, all the way up to the Merkle root. Now, if you have, for example, 1,000 or 2,000 transactions in the tree, you can do that proof with just 10 hashes. You can produce a Merkle path to the top. So that gives you a very short proof with just 10 256-bit hashes that allows you to demonstrate the existence of any one of 2,000 transactions in a specific block. Combined with showing the proof of work and the block header, you can actually demonstrate that that block had an enormous amount of mining behind it when it was recorded, and that serves as proof that that block was actually mined on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, this is not as strong a proof as being able to verify the entire chain all the way up to that particular block and verify the UTXO itself, and also verify that that UTXO has not been spent. But it is a simplified payment verification, which is why they call it SPV. So SPV proofs are verified by the miners who are verifying the sidechain. And the consensus algorithm can be different. In some cases, the verifiers are a federated group, such as, for example, in the Liquid sidechain, where the verifiers are a federation who participate in a multi-sig, and the SPV proofs are verified by this federation. In other examples, you might have a sidechain that uses proof of work or proof of stake or some other consensus model. So it depends entirely on the consensus model of the sidechain. Remember, when you have a sidechain, its security is only as strong as its consensus mechanism. And if it's a sidechain to the Bitcoin blockchain, its security will be different from the proof of work security that is provided in the Bitcoin blockchain. So when you're looking at the security of sidechains, you have to consider the consensus model and level of security that the sidechain offers, as well as the level of security that the primary chain offers. And any chain can be a sidechain to any other chain, effectively. Damianos asks, is Bitcoin anonymous? All exchanges and wallets ask for identity. Is Bitcoin an anonymous system? Well, first of all, and this is really important to understand, exchanges may ask for you to prove your identity. That is not Bitcoin. Those are third-party services that operate as banks, allowing you to exchange national currency, and it's because they are exchanging national currency that they are obligated under the laws as third-party companies to ask you for your identity. Your identity is not on the blockchain, and this has nothing to do with Bitcoin. If you install a wallet of your own where you control the keys, there is no identity required. You don't identify yourself to anyone. And therefore, from that respect, there is no link between your identity and, say, the Bitcoin address or the wallet that you installed. So when your wallet generates a private key of its own and then generates a Bitcoin address or several Bitcoin addresses that you can use in your wallet, there's no link between that and your identity. There's no link between that and your IP address and your location and your name and any other identifying information. However, if you use that Bitcoin address in relation to an external service, such as an exchange or a merchant, where you then provide your name, address, and things like that, that external service will link the Bitcoin address that you just provided to your real-life identity. As a result, you've just blown the anonymity aspect of Bitcoin. Furthermore, because you will then use that Bitcoin address in your wallet to make transactions, if your identity has been linked to one Bitcoin address, and then other Bitcoin addresses are linked to that Bitcoin address due to the activities that you do, for example, transferring money between addresses of your own wallet, using multiple chunks of Bitcoin. We'll talk about that in a subsequent lesson when we talk about UTXO in the blockchain. When you link together and you leave this statistical trail that correlates very many different Bitcoin addresses together, and one of them is connected to your real-life identity, then the others are also connected, probabilistically, statistically connected to your real-life identity. In practice, it is very, very difficult to use Bitcoin with complete anonymity unless you take relatively strong steps to protect your operational security. You never link any of the addresses you've used to your real identity. And in practice, that's very difficult to do. It takes a lot of effort, and most people don't do it. If you acquire your Bitcoin by exchanging national currency through an exchange where you've provided your ID, obviously that's going to statistically taint all other Bitcoin transactions you do from that point on and correlate them with that identity. And all of these exchanges provide this information either willingly or inadvertently. If they get hacked or if they're already hacked by intelligence agencies, they provide that information effectively to everyone in the world. So if you give your identity to one of these exchanges, you should assume that everyone in the world then has that information. From a security perspective, you should assume that it's already leaked. So given all of that, Bitcoin is not strongly anonymous, it is pseudonymous, meaning that you use a pseudo identity, which is your Bitcoin address and the related Bitcoin addresses on the system, and that gives you some degree of anonymity as long as that Bitcoin address is not associated with your real-life identity. There are other blockchain systems that provide stronger levels of anonymity, whereby it is impossible to track which transactions are being made by which addresses, whereas in Bitcoin, anyone can look at an address and see all of the transactions it's made and can see how much money it has, etc., etc. There are other blockchains where that's not the case, where you cannot track which address is making which transactions. So Bitcoin is a pseudonymous system, and if you use it by connecting primarily to exchanges and merchants that have your identity, then it is not even a pseudonymous system. In fact, it is a public transaction system where your identity is known. And Damianos has a follow-up question, which is, how can I buy Bitcoin with my own wallet? Don't I need an exchange? Well, if your attitude towards cryptocurrency is to buy it as an investment, that's very, very true. But you don't have to buy cryptocurrency, you can earn it. You can earn it by providing products and services through your labor. And you can also exchange it for cash by meeting someone in person who's willing to give you cryptocurrency in exchange for cash. And in that case, your identity is not involved in that transaction at all. So there are ways to acquire cryptocurrency by selling products and services that have nothing to do with revealing your identity.
Diva asks, recently I decided to create my wallet and I wonder, apart from buying Bitcoin, how else can I get them? In resources I've read, there are some tasks which you could do for Bitcoin. Is there a reliable and official marketplace for earning Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? Diva, unfortunately, this is a very tricky question because for many of the things you will find online, they are scams, and you need to be very, very, very careful. People will suggest sending you money to your bank account and then giving you Bitcoin, or you send money to their bank account and then they give you Bitcoin, etc., etc. And there's all of these things where they say, okay, just forward this package for me and I'll send you Bitcoin as payment for your task. Almost all of these things you will find are scams, and they work in a variety of different ways, but they basically cheat you out of your money because a lot of bank transactions, cash deposits, checks, etc. are reversible and crypto isn't. So this is a difficult topic to deal with. I think the best way to do it is to see what skills you have professionally and what you can offer other people in terms of services and products. So if you make something, you make crafts, you make art pieces, you make servers and desktops, you make whatever, graphic design, then you can sell those things for Bitcoin, whether it's a service or a product, your labor, etc., and you can get paid. I think that's probably the easiest way, earning. The second easiest way is to go to an ATM. Unfortunately, many of the other ways of acquiring cryptocurrency are actually scams, so you have to be very careful. Damianos asks, how can I set up my own wallet without providing any identity? That's a great question, Damianos. I can make a number of suggestions. I do not endorse any of these wallets, but I know other people have used them in the past and they like them. There are a number of different wallets that you can use. What you're looking for is a wallet that generates a secure mnemonic phrase locally on your own device where that phrase doesn't leave. The best way to do this is to purchase a hardware wallet. If you are not yet involved in crypto enough to have the funds to purchase a hardware wallet, I would recommend the second best option is to download a wallet onto your smartphone, because your smartphone is probably the device that is the most secure device you have. Modern smartphone operating systems are extremely secure if you keep up with the updates, have set a PIN, and are careful about what applications you download. They're extremely secure, more secure than a laptop or desktop device. So if you have an Apple phone, for example, you can go online and review all of the wallets that are available in the App Store, the Apple iTunes App Store, and you can find the correct wallet for your needs. I'm not an Apple user, so I'm not sure which wallets are the most popular today on Apple. I believe one of them is BRD, which I know uses BIP39 mnemonic phrases. I know there are others, but I'm not quite sure because I don't use them. On my Android device, I have a whole set of different wallets. I use wallets like Mycelium, Samurai, and a number of others, Green Address, which has multi-sig capabilities. And these wallets are well-built, secure, well-reviewed, used for many years, and they generate the keys on your device, and therefore you are in control of your funds. Those are good ways to start. None of these require you to put in your identity. On your desktop, you could download a wallet like the Electrum wallet or the Wasabi wallet, for example, and those are also good choices that you can apply that give you a degree of control over your funds. However, it is much more difficult to secure a desktop wallet. I recommend when you use desktop wallets, you only use them in conjunction with a hardware wallet where the keys are actually generated and stored on the hardware wallet and not on the generic operating system. Most desktop operating systems are not secure enough. Most desktops and laptops are not secure enough to hold crypto funds.
Andreas, to what extent do you recommend coin joins? Do you still think this could be made illegal? And to reiterate for a bit more context, what is a coin join? A coin join is some kind of implementation where a transaction involves multiple participants providing inputs, meaning that a transaction can have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. Neither the inputs nor the outputs have to come from the same person or the same wallet or the same controlling entity. You could have yourself and 3 of your friends construct a transaction where you take an input each and sign it, and then make a payment each, and you have 4 inputs and 4 outputs so that each of you gets to pay your favorite thing, whatever that may be. And if you look at that transaction, it's very difficult to see where the inputs and where the outputs are going. Now, if you chain several of these together, so you have a transaction with 100 participants and 100 inputs, 100 outputs, and then those outputs are sent into a transaction that has 100 inputs and 100 outputs, and those outputs are sent into a transaction. You do multiple rounds of these. By the end of it, it's incredibly difficult to do statistical analysis of where those coins come. However, you do know, or rather the analytics surveillance companies that monitor blockchain, the blockchain surveillance companies, they do know that those outputs came from a coin join. Because it's fairly obvious that a transaction that has 100 inputs and 100 outputs is unlikely to be a run-of-the-mill payment by a single user's wallet. So a coin join doesn't provide identity information. However, as far as the surveillance companies are concerned, it will taint your output points because they will then flag that as high risk if you try to move those outputs further down the chain to a merchant or exchange that is using surveillance companies to both spy on its users and score the risk of transactions. So do I recommend coin joins? It depends on the circumstances and what you're trying to do. If you regularly move money into and out of regulated entities like exchanges, and you want that money to still work on those exchanges, you will carry your identity with you on all of those transactions. And if you do coin join somewhere in between, you may find your account being shut down, frozen, or even your coins seized by this custodial entity because they consider them tainted, risky, or something like that. If you're doing transactions between your own wallets, private wallets of other individuals, you're using it to do things where you need to preserve privacy, like paying payroll for employees and things like that, and neither you nor the others in the chain are particularly interested in exchanging these for fiat or using them to buy products from regulated merchants and things like that, then that might be a very good privacy solution for you. As to whether this could be made illegal, the word illegal should always be followed by the question, where? Could this be made illegal? Illegal where? Dancing is illegal in some countries. Legal, illegal depends very, very much on jurisdiction. I can't even tell you what is legal or illegal in many countries because it's impossible to know. Even in a single country, let's say the United States, if you ask a lawyer, is this legal? They'll ask you where, because the next question is in which state, because there are overlapping state and federal jurisdictions, especially when it comes to things like money transmission. And it also depends on what type of entity we're talking about, if it's an individual versus a corporation. A corporation that is doing things that involve coin joins or transactions like that may be considered a money transmitter under certain state laws. An individual would unlikely be considered a money transmitter, but again, whether it's legal or illegal, I can't really tell you that. It very much depends on your jurisdiction. So ask a lawyer about that, preferably a lawyer who understands both tax law as well as various other laws related to and regulations related to money transmission, and anti-money laundering rules and things like that. And absolutely, it could be made illegal in the future. It may even already be illegal under some interpretations, and then it's maybe more a matter of, are you likely to be targeted for prosecution, which is a tricky thing for people who are high profile in this industry and likely to be targeted. So do I recommend coin joins? I can recommend coin joins because I don't know where you live and whether that would be a legal or a smart thing to do. But here's what I can tell you. If you're a political activist in North Korea, if you're a protester in Hong Kong, if you're part of the opposition movement or political party in Venezuela, if you're trying to overthrow a dictator, do I recommend coin joins? Hell yes, I do. And if it's illegal, then in many cases it may be just meaning that it is in promotion of justice and morally ethical, perhaps even a moral obligation to fight back against a tyrannical regime that is destroying your country or persecuting a minority or something like that. And then you should absolutely fight back. The fact that it is illegal is part of the problem in tyrannical governments. Even here in the US, everything the founding fathers did, including signing the Declaration of Independence, was not only illegal, it was in fact treason against the crown. We seem to forget sometimes that even treasonous acts can be justified in the face of tyranny.